The woman who had turned her most intimate thoughts into global anthems looked like she was afraid to feel anything authentic. Taylor Swift sat across from Jimmy Fallon in Studio 6B, her legendary presence somehow constrained, as if the creative freedom that had made her one of music's biggest stars was being suffocated by the weight of her own success. They'd been playing Creative Pressure, a Tonight Show game where artists discussed maintaining authenticity while navigating commercial expectations. For Taylor, it had become a confession about losing the very thing that had made her special. "Taylor, here's a question every songwriter would love to hear," Jimmy had said with his usual enthusiasm, though there was obvious admiration in his voice. "You've had so many #1 hits, so many Grammy wins. When you sit down to write now, what does it feel like to know that millions of people are waiting to hear what you create next?" The question should have been empowering for Taylor. Here was a woman who had proven she could reinvent herself across genres, who had turned personal storytelling into a cultural movement. This should have been a celebration of influence and artistic freedom. Instead, Jimmy watched as one of music's most successful artists began to quietly panic. "Jimmy?" Taylor said, her voice missing its usual confident warmth. "That's exactly what's terrifying me. Because when I sit down to write now, I'm not thinking about what I feel or what I want to say. I'm thinking about whether it will chart, whether it will win awards, whether it will meet the expectations of people who expect every song to be a masterpiece." The studio fell silent, sensing that whatever was coming would reveal something profound about the hidden cost of musical success. "For the first time in my career, I'm writing for outcomes instead of emotions," Taylor continued, her voice carrying a weight that surprised everyone. "And I think I'm losing the magic that made people fall in love with my music in the first place." The confession hung in the studio air like an admission that success could cannibalize the very creativity that created it. The audience, expecting inspiring talk about artistic evolution and continued growth, instead found themselves witnessing something much more vulnerable, their storytelling hero admitting she was forgetting how to tell her own story. Jimmy felt his entertainment instincts immediately give way to concern. "What do you mean you're losing the magic?" Taylor looked down at her hands that had written countless melodies, strummed through countless emotions, created countless connections with strangers through song. And when she looked back up, her eyes carried something that devastated her: creative anxiety. "I mean, I used to write songs because I had something I needed to say, some feeling I needed to process," she said, her voice becoming smaller, more uncertain. "Now I sit down to write and the first thought isn't, what am I feeling? It's, will this go to #1? Will this get the right streaming numbers? Will this sound different enough from my last album, but similar enough that fans will love it?" The cameras continued rolling, but everyone in Studio 6B understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. One of music's most authentic artists revealing how commercial pressure was threatening to destroy her artistic soul. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment. He stood up from his desk and moved to sit directly next to Taylor, understanding that this conversation required protection from the very pressures she was describing. "When did you first notice this happening?" Jimmy asked gently. "It's been building for years," Taylor admitted, "but it really hit me during my last album cycle. I had this song that felt honest and raw, but I started second-guessing it because it didn't fit sound trends. I realized I was editing my own emotions before they made it to paper, censoring my feelings based on market research instead of just feeling them." Jimmy leaned closer, sensing the depth of the creative crisis Taylor was experiencing. "What does that feel like when you're trying to create?" "It feels like trying to have a conversation while simultaneously planning what you're going to say next," Taylor said, her voice cracking. "I can't be present in the emotion because I'm too busy calculating how that emotion will be received, how it will perform, what it means for my career trajectory. The audience was completely silent, many beginning to understand how success could become its own form of creative prison. I'll give you an example, Taylor continued, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I was writing a song about a really personal experience recently, something that hurt me deeply. But halfway through, I started thinking, this isn't uplifting enough for radio. This won't be a good single. And I stopped writing because I was more worried about how my pain would be marketed than whether expressing it would help me heal. Jimmy felt his heart break for the woman sitting next to him. That must be incredibly isolating. It is, Taylor said simply, because music used to be my safe space. It was where I could be completely honest, where I could work through my feelings without judgment. Now it feels like even my most private thoughts have to pass through a focus group before I'm allowed to feel them. Jimmy was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of what Taylor was sharing. Can you remember the last time you wrote something without thinking about how it would be received? Taylor looked genuinely surprised by the question, as if no one had asked her to separate her creativity from her career strategy in years. She paused, clearly searching through recent memories. There was this song I wrote a few months ago at like 3 a.m. I was going through something personal, and I just started playing guitar and singing whatever came out. No recording, no plan to ever share it, just pure expression. Her voice grew slightly stronger as she continued. And for those 20 minutes, I remembered why I started writing music. Not because I wanted to be famous or successful, but because turning feelings into melodies felt like the most natural thing in the world. How did that song feel different from your usual writing process? Jimmy asked. It felt free, Taylor said, and for the first time in the conversation, there was genuine warmth in her voice. It felt like I was writing for myself instead of for the industry. It felt like the songs I used to write in my bedroom when I was 16 and no one was listening. Jimmy leaned forward. What if that feeling could be your compass? What if instead of asking, will this be successful, you started asking, does this feel true? For the first time in the conversation, Taylor's eyes showed something other than anxiety. But what if what feels true doesn't connect with people anymore? What if my authentic voice isn't what made me successful? What if it was just the right voice for the right time, and now that time has passed? Taylor, Jimmy said softly, what made people fall in love with your music wasn't market research or strategic planning. It was the fact that you were brave enough to say things that other people felt but couldn't express. That courage doesn't have an expiration date. Jimmy turned to address the audience. How many people in here fell in love with Taylor's music because it felt calculated and strategic? No hands went up. How many fell in love with it because it felt honest and real? Hands shot up throughout the studio and the applause was immediate and emotional. Jimmy turned back to Taylor. You see that? They're not waiting for you to be perfect. They're waiting for you to be yourself. Taylor looked out at the response and something in her expression began to change. The anxiety was still there, but it was being joined by something else, permission. I want to try something, Taylor said, addressing the cameras directly. I want to commit to writing one song this week without any thought about how it will be received. Just pure expression, the way I used to write when music was my diary instead of my business. The studio erupted in support of applause. And I want to say something to any artist watching who feels like they're losing themselves in their success. Taylor continued, her voice growing stronger. Maybe the goal isn't to write hits. Maybe the goal is to write truth. And maybe if we're brave enough to be honest, the connection we create will be deeper than any chart position could ever measure. She paused, looking directly into the camera. I got into music because songs saved my life. Other people's honest, vulnerable, imperfect songs. Maybe it's time I stopped trying to save my career and started trying to save someone else's life with my honesty." The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't typical celebrity applause. It was recognition, gratitude from people who needed permission to prioritize authenticity over achievement. "How does it feel to say that out loud?" Jimmy asked. "Terrifying and liberating," Taylor admitted honestly. "Like I just gave myself permission to fail commercially in order to succeed creatively." Jimmy stood up and embraced Taylor. Not a show business hug, but a real moment of human support and artistic encouragement. When they separated, he looked directly at her. "Taylor, thank you for showing us that the most important audience for any artist is the person they were before they became successful. Thank you for reminding me that connection matters more than perfection," Taylor replied. 6 months later, Taylor Swift released her most personal work in years, an album prioritizing emotional honesty over commercial strategy. While not every song became a massive hit, the album was praised for its authenticity. The segment became one of the most shared pieces about creative integrity and artistic pressure. Industry professionals credited Taylor with starting important conversations about balancing commercial success and creative authenticity. Jimmy later said the conversation changed how he thought about success. "Taylor taught me that the goal isn't to make art that sells. The goal is to make art that matters." Taylor continued being a music superstar, but now approached songwriting as Taylor Swift the person, not the brand. She learned her fans didn't need her to be superhuman. They needed her to be human. The woman who had spent years trying to write the perfect song had finally remembered that the perfect song was simply the truest one.